The Locker Room, with all the sports news you need, live.
Good afternoon and welcome along to the first Sunday Locker Room of the new season. It is great to be back on a Sunday. I am Graham Duffy, as you well know. We are here until 5 o'clock, and I'm delighted to say that I'm not on my own tonight, which I thought I might be. I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Dave Smith. Dave, it's great to have you back on. How's things?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Good summer, opportunity to recharge the batteries. And what an extraordinary programme we had yesterday, and obviously Friday night as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Delighted also to be back on. We've got Nigel in the background, hopefully doing the producing stuff. Although I'm not actually sure we're live because I can't seem to get the live button to go. So I don't know if you've got any issues with the live button here.
We're definitely live because there's a button at the top left-hand corner that suggests we're live, Graham. So I'm
No, that's fine because it wasn't coming up on mine, so that's fine. We're going to look back on the action from yesterday, but we'll also keep an eye on the game that's kicked off just about a minute ago at Easter Road between Hibernian and St Mirren. So before we get to the games from yesterday and talk about Friday, Hibs against St Mirren, Dave, difficult game to call. Lee Johnson has been backed very heavily in the transfer window. What are you expecting for both Hibs and St Mirren this season?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because Hibs, well, let's be honest, they embarrassed Scottish football last Thursday, didn't they? Obviously, they retrieved that in some fashion on Thursday night. They had to because everything else would have been deemed absolutely abysmal and pitiful as far as Hibernian were concerned. But St Mirren are looking to kick on from last season, with the exception of the result of it being thrown in the Viaplay Cup. St Mirren have had a very strong start to the season in terms of progressing through the Viaplay Cup, disposing of some good teams such as Forfar and Arbroath. They've obviously disposed of them fairly comfortably. Stephen Robinson's brought in a good blend of player. He has lost some, but I think he had to. I think he had to let some players go to get new players in. Corbett Merriman looks a tremendous signing. I'm looking forward to seeing how he gets on the Scottish Premiership with the Buddies. He's also used this Northern Irish market very, very well. I think the Northern Irish League is a very underrated league when it comes to entertaining players coming to Scottish football, and Stephen Robinson's used that to his full disposal. So we'll obviously get on to a certain story in Ayrshire later on the show, but obviously one of the players that came out of Northern Irish football scored that specific winning goal yesterday. So yeah, I think the Northern Irish market's a good one. Today is going to be rather interesting because St Mirren will look at Hibs as a potential banana skin. If St Mirren can go and win this, it's a huge marker so early in the season because Easter Road, as we all know, is a tough place to go to. The Hibs, I think they need to make home territory count because as much as Hibs got opponents at exactly the same time, Lee Johnson's not a popular man in Leaf just now either, especially after some of last season's performances and especially after what had happened in Andorra. I don't know where Graham's went, by the way, but yeah.
I am still here. I'm just checking something.
Right, okay. Right, okay. Mr. Duffy is in black, but yes, I think it's going to be an interesting one. Goalkeeping situation is a bit funny for Hibs just now. Obviously, they had to get the boy Boric, and I was reading the papers today to realise he played 2 games in 24 hours when he played on Thursday for Hibs the Europa League qualifying. Because he also played on Wednesday for Hibs development side, the SPFL Trust Trophy against Martin United, which Hibs won in penalties. So that was a very long night for Mr. Boric. But I found it rather fascinating that Boric, I'll let it get first name for you, but I found he's obviously related to Arthur Boric, ex-Celtic goalkeeper, but I realised in the papers, I was a bit surprised by this, I realised that they hadn't spoke to each other, so interesting game in our hands this afternoon at Easter Road, and hopefully there's goals afloat for us to talk about.
I hope so. I mean, one of the things that Hibs made, I mean, they have spent a lot of money on a striker who can't play yet, apparently because of work permit issues, but one of the players that they have brought in is Dylan Levitt. Are you surprised that he's gone to Hibs, and how big an influence do you think he could have on Hibs? He's on the bench today. He was on the bench again last week as well. How big an influence do you think he can have on Hibs?
I'll address the signing in a minute. I think the reason why he's on the bench is because probably I don't think he's match fit. Because I think Lee Johnson's kind of implied that himself in interviews that he's been asked on regular occasions why Levitt maybe has been playing, and he has been saying, I don't think Levitt's match fit yet. And I think he needs minutes in order to go and build that up. Reserve games and SPFL's Trust Trophy games are all fine and well. Sorry, I thought something wrong with the laptop there for a minute. But yeah, I think he needs more minutes. If Hibs are fairly comfortable in this game, don't be surprised to see Lee giving him half an hour perhaps. But yeah, I think Dylan Levitt is a top player. I just think there was a lot of change at United last year, with obviously Jack Ross coming in, and then that never quite materialised into such. And Liam Fox never got the best out of him. Jim Goodwin, it was basically Jim Goodwin's got a certain way of working, and it was basically a case of right, out you go, out the building. In terms of Hibs, I think he suits Hibs because, and let's be honest, from a Hearts contingency point of view as well, I don't think you'd have been blinkered one bit, Graham, had you went and signed him either, because he is that good a midfielder. But the thing is that you need to get him on the ball. You need to get him challenging opponents. You need to get him into good areas. You need to get him up in 1-1 situations with opposition players for him to really excel as a player. You see that with United under Tam Courts, how he was telling Dylan to get into good areas. He was telling him to break into the final third on regular occasion. He was telling him, look, go and expose defenders as and when you possibly can. So that's a massive thing as far as Dylan Levitt's concerned. And I think he needs a big season in his hands because, let's be honest, the Wales call-up, he was rejuvenated by that when he was at Dundee United. It hasn't quite materialised in the way he'd have perceived it this time around. So I think he needs a big season to kind of cement his place in the Wales squad again, and try and force his way to Wales's plans to become a regular.
In terms of St Mirren, they had a really good season last season. Do you think they can do that again this season, finish top 6? Or maybe even try and challenge for that third place?
It's a good question, actually, Graham, because when you're looking at all the sides within the Premiership at this precise moment in time, and we'll get on to it, but I'm not going to read too much into Aberdeen drawing 0-0 Livingston yesterday, because we all know how tough the Tony McInerney is to go to. Hibs for me have still got a lot of convincing to do. And I'm not reading much into Hearts winning 2-0 Perth yesterday, because I still think Hearts have levels to reach. I still think Hearts are far from the first article. And I'll be brutally honest, I don't know if you agree with being a Hearts fan, Graham, but I think there's a little bit of disarray at the moment with the management situation, because obviously Naismith's got a big part to play in it, but obviously he doesn't have the criteria required to be that leading man. And frankly needed Frankie McAvoy to go and lead the line and become that head coach. And if I don't know what it's like internally in terms of a player, but I know from the outside looking in, the interviews they gave to the broadcast media elsewhere left a lot to be desired. So that's going to be rather an interesting one. Kilmarnock, we'll obviously get on to them later on the show as well. I think they've got a dark horse shout of being in the top 6 this year, and I'll elaborate more on that later on the show. I just think they've got a good blend of player. St Mirren's going to be an interesting one, because I think they'll be well and truly clear from the relegation zone, but at exactly the same time, I think they are going to have a bit bigger struggle this time around. But I think the next few games in the first quarter of the season will dictate how they get on, because, as I say, there's still a lot to answer in terms of Hibs, Hearts, perhaps Aberdeen to a certain extent as well. So, yeah, there's a lot to dissect before we even think about that. But I do think they have a decent enough shout at it. What Robert wouldn't want to fall into. He wouldn't want to fall into a trap door where they had a very good season at Motherwell when they first founded, and COVID came along, and then things never quite materialised. The way Robinson works suits the Scottish game. He's pretty much fallen in love with the Scottish game in terms of how he plays, because he's had a couple of stints in England and it's just never materialised for him. Like Morecambe, for example, Morecambe was going reasonably well for him, but the lure of Scottish football, the lure of Paisley, let's be honest, the lure of a smaller budget was probably an enticing one for Robinson. So, yeah, I think St Mirren will be in the same position they were last season, but it's going to be interesting to see if they can replicate that top 6 finish.
Well, let's look back at the action. And we'll start with Friday night, because it was a return of Friday night championship football at Gayfield, where Dundee United, who didn't have the best of Viaplay Cups, they got beat by Partick Thistle, and they lost to Spartans 1-0, and a lot of United fans were not happy, but they went to Arbroath and they won by 4-0. I didn't expect that, to be honest. Very comfortable. They won 4-0, all 4 goals in the first half through Glenn Middleton, Cujo, Sibbald, and Moult. Dave, you were there in attendance at the game. You're probably the best person to say. How impressed were you with Dundee United on Friday?
Yeah, I was impressed, but I'm going to argue that as well by saying that Arbroath were completely abject. And I think if Dick Campbell was still listening to this, I don't think he would disagree with me one bit. I hope Dick and Ian do listen to this, by the way, because I do have some very brutal, honest opinions on the game. But in terms of Dundee United, it suited them to an absolute T. Not in terms of the surface, not in terms of the occasion. It was more how both teams set themselves up, because Dundee United really got the scruff between their neck. This had the potential to be a very gloomy evening for Dundee United, because as you've touched upon there, Graham, they obviously got beat by Partick Thistle, and it was a very underwhelming performance. That exceeded the pressure, on Jim Goodwin. They could beat the Spartans, and we were going, oh no, Darvel all over again. And then, but to my understanding, they weren't exactly brilliant against Peterhead. They needed 2 penalties to beat Peterhead. And then Falkirk was 1-0, but I know, having spoken to United fans, they were a little bit, they were not confident. Carlisle, they played Carlisle in their friendly last Saturday, United, and United fans were starting to get a little bit excited then. But pre-season is quite irrelevant in terms of reading matches such as Carlisle. But the likes of Scott McMahon got certain mentions, Tony Watt got mentions, Matthew Cujo got mentions, Glenn Middleton, Lee Moult, and all them players I've just mentioned there all played a significant part in Friday night's victory, and that was the most pleasing thing about it. But most importantly, Graham, it's a tangible victory, tangible in the aspect that it is a massive statement for Dundee United. Yeah, they were playing on the both sides, let's be honest, didn't cover themselves in full glory, and it's on both sides that need to get back to the drawing board as far as rectifying matters is concerned. I'd argue that the Championship's one of the most competitive campaigns we've seen this season, because Arbroath are the only part-time team in the league. And that's been the case for a good few years now, don't get me wrong, but at exactly the same time, they've had a better calibre of player over the last few years, like Joel Newbley a few years ago, Jack Hamilton, who's back in the Championship, ironically, with the Rovers. They've had a good array of player, but also they've had a solidarity in the middle of the pack as well. Nicky Lowe, I said it at the time when he left the club because through all the issues that arose, that I said at the time that Nicky Lowe was going to have a massive miss for North, not in terms of how he plays, but how he slows a game down. That was massive for me, but also the boy that used to be at Hearts, Chris Hamilton. He was very, very good slowing the game down. They don't have any of that now. The first goal resonated with that on Friday, because Louis Moult stole the ball off Joe Baldy in the middle of the park. Let's be honest, Baldy and the guy Craig Slater didn't have any answers after that, because Moult played that killer pass into Glenn Middleton, and Glenn Middleton just had the freedom of Gayfield essentially to go and sneak palm the ball at the bottom right corner. So it was a very good strike as far as Glenn Middleton was concerned. But you thought the goal for United would have sparked a bit of a reaction, and for any of both fans that know, Dick Campbell likes to sit up in the stands during the games. But as soon as United scored, that was him off this seat and in home dugout, because he was infuriated by the performance. Now, I never got the opportunity to speak to Dick after the game on Friday, because he was speaking to BBC and we got a hold of Ian Campbell instead. And Ian's a very different personality to his brother Dick. But second goal flew in, and again, it was another good piece. Moult getting the provider. What a game he had. And then Cujo. I'm looking forward to seeing the prospect of Cujo this year. I just don't think the Premiership was a bit premature for it. He just wasn't ready for it. And I think a good season in the Championship, where it's a good standard, but it's a good developing ground for you as well, I think we'll stand him in good stead. So he took his second goal superbly well. Ironically, that's his first goal in Dundee United colours. 3-0 afterwards. Sibbald, who was brilliant. He didn't have to be brilliant on Friday, though. And this is what I'm saying. Baldy and Slater were so soft in the middle that Sibbald and Ross Docherty have got a very quiet evening. And I spoke to Tam O'Brien after the game, they're both captain. I did go and say, look, you're usually tough to beat defensively, and you usually fairly intense in the final third. And you never had that. And Tam was elaborating and said, look, you've got a very good point here. He went and said, it's because we're going through a new system, we've got new players coming in who are slowly but surely adjusting to Scottish Championship football. That's perfectly understandable. But Sibbald threatened with a goal 4 minutes earlier, but never quite proceeded. But once he got that third goal, it was pretty much game over. I said in my report, I write for the newspapers, obviously. I said in my match report that it was basically curtains out by the time Coronation Street finished on Friday night. It was that poor as far as the broken concerned, but Dundee were quite scintillating form. But the fourth goal came along and too well split William Alt because he deserved a goal. Although obviously I've touched upon it when I did an interview with him in today's papers, and he did touch upon it, saying, look, I might have to look at my assist bonus, which he was obviously joking, of course, but I mean, if he's going to provide goals, but at exactly the same time provide assists, it's only going to be a good thing for Dundee United. I don't think it's a big signing because William Bolt suits Scottish football exactly at the same time. I know he's had injuries, and I know he did an interview with the Herald back in May where he spoke to Alan Burns before Alan came to Aberdeen, of course, and he offered to play for the Steelmen for free. But William Bolt could easily play for a Premiership club. I mean, from my heart's point of view, Graham, you would happily have it with Shanklin, would you? You'd probably look at that and say Bolt and Shanklin would work well together in the Premiership.
100%. I think Malt's a really good player, and I think I put in the group chat before we came on here as well. You mentioned Louis Moult there. I think for me, he's probably one of the signs of the season in the Championship. I think he could be really impressive. The last time United came up, they came up because of the goals of Shankland. So do you now think that Louis Moult could be the big difference? And actually, before you answer that, I just want to say there's been 2 quick goals at Easter Road. It's Hibernian 0, St Mirren 2 already.
That's a great start as far as St Mirren were concerned. Sorry, by the way, I thought it was somebody at the door there. That's a fantastic start as far as St Mirren are concerned. And what I will say is, Graham, I didn't expect it to be that bad. Well, what a scintillating start that is from St Mirren, because, I wasn't expecting them to be so... I was expecting St Mirren to have a right good go. I wouldn't say in the predictions that I didn't think it was going to be much between the sides today, but St Mirren 2-0 up. I'm just imagining the scenes from Easter Road right now.
100%. But just go back to the point about Louis Moult. I mean, do you think he could be one of the signings and one of the players of the season in the Championship? And again, you mentioned it at the start there about, obviously, we talked about the fact that they got beat by Spartans, they got beat by Partick Thistle. How much pressure is there on Jim Goodwin to make sure that they get promoted straight away from this league?
Oh, there's massive pressure on Jim Goodwin to get promoted straight away, and he's been given the tools and the foundations and resources to go and do it, and it's up to him now. 3 or 4 weeks ago, you'd have been questioning United at every possible aspect possible, going, do they have the credentials to do it? Are they ready to go and do it? But now I think they are. I know a lot of people won't read too much into Friday night's game, but Dundee United have caused a lot of division amongst Twitter, I've noticed, because I've seen a few comments. I've seen Blair McNally, a fellow blogger, was going out saying yesterday that Dundee United are top 6 side, and he was getting a lot of criticism for the way he went about it, for the way he said it, sorry. I went and replied back to Blair saying, no, I agree with what you're saying. I think Dundee United do have a top 6 squad on paper, because, as I say, but we're seeing it just now in Leaf, where St Mirren are absolutely trawling all over Hibs, and Hearts. I'm still a bit convinced by Hearts. I'm going to be very, very honest with that front. I think Hearts' European pedigree could match my decisions, because if Hearts have a good European campaign, I think my perception of them maybe changes a little bit. And in Aberdeen, I think Aberdeen will have a fairly solid season. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But Goodwin has to hit the ground running, and I think he needs to get off to a good start this season, which he did on Friday. As for Wee Malt, I think in terms of Malt, I had a few pals, funnily enough, disagree with me on Tuesday because I went and said I thought Wee Malt would be top scorer this season in the championship, and I had a few pals disagree with me, going, no, he's 31-year-old, he's past it, blah blah blah. But I felt with the way United play, and I was speaking to Dundee United journalist on Friday, and I was asking, look, do Watt and Moult play two, they play a 4-4-2 or a formation with two strikers? He said, no, Watt will play behind, and so it proved to be on Friday. And I think Moult just offers that bit of variability that Dundee United so require, and he's going to be a massive player. I think he'll score 10 to 15 goals, perhaps even more this season, but also I think he'll combine so much in terms of assists. But that's what Shankland did as well. United, when he was at the club, he does it the same at Hearts as well. Shankland would always score goals, but then he'd a good support network, like some Nicky Clark involved, and he'd another good striker, I've forgotten his name now, but he had a good support network, and that he'll be hoping for such a same with William Moult. I think Moult will kick on at United, but and then it's going to be another fascinating one regarding the end of it, because if Moult goes and scores 20 to 25 goals, let's say at Talladega this season, he's on a 1-year deal, which Dundee a big enough prospect to obviously commit your time long term at the club. At exactly the same time, it'll catch the attention of fellow Scottish Premiership clubs who might be go sniffing about, going, I'll have you, no problem. So, yeah, I think there's going to be an interesting year as far as Moult's concerned. I think it's arguably one of his biggest seasons yet. When he arrived in Scottish football, it was a case of nobody knew him. You say for Motherwell, only the Motherwell fans and Motherwell managers and coaching staff really knew him. But I think now everybody knows him. Everybody knows he's such a pivotal striker. He's a goal poacher. And I think he needs a big season to kind of rejuvenate his career a little bit.
Yeah, before we get to the Celtic game yesterday, the rest of the games in the Championship: Dunfermline 2, Airdrie 1, Morton 3, Ayr 1, Inverness 1, Queen's Park 2, and Partick Thistle 2, Wraith Rovers 2. I am genuinely interested to see, for me, how Airdrie do this season. In that league, it's going to be difficult. I'm just trying to get the goal scorers actually for St Mirren. So it was Mark O'Hara penalty, and Olusiania got the other goal as well. So 60 minutes gone in that game. Hibs 0, St Mirren 2. But just before we got to the Celtic game, Dave, I just want to ask you about Airdrie. How do you think they're going to do in the Championship this season? Could they be up there challenging at the top, or are they going to be looking maybe kind of mid-table area?
Apologies, sorry, I was on mute there. I think Airdrie will be mid-table this season. I think it'll be a step too far for the playoffs. I think Airdrie will be a fairly competitive side, and I think the home games will play a huge part of that, because Airdrie are a tough-to-beat side, but exactly the same time, they are very, very good moving forward, and they're a very ruthless side whenever they're in the final third. So that's going to be a key moment for Airdrie. I like the job Reece McCabe's doing there, and they've been very, very strong at home, as it's been proven already within the Viaplay Cup and in the league last year. They beat Dundee in the Viaplay Cup, and by all accounts, Airdrie, they had to show a bit of resilience within the game, but by all accounts, they were well and truly in the game and obviously scored for a late penalty. But I also think that they're more than a match for championship sides. I mean, Dundee had a good side last season under Gary Boyer. Airdrie pushed them all the way and needed Dundee extra time to beat Airdrie. I think McCabe kind of admitted himself that he needed that Airdrie had too much youngsters involved that day. And I think, to McCabe's credit, he's strengthened with experience. That's obviously going to be a massive thing for Airdrie. So I think they'll be comfortable enough, and I think they'll have enough about them to avoid relegation, but they'll need to obviously get wins on the board and take it from there.
100%. Let's move on to the Premiership, and let's start with the champions Celtic, who kicked off an early against Ross County, and they won by 4-2. The goals from David Turnbull double. Kyogo, as always, scoring, and Matt O'Reilly. The goals from Ross County come from Jordan White, and a Carl Starfelt own goal after an effort from James Brown was diverted in by Starfelt. I think if you look at that Celtic team, though, yesterday, Dave, obviously they gave a debut to the new signing Narovski at the back, but one of the biggest omissions yesterday was Rio Hitati didn't start, David Turnbull did start, and by what I saw of the game, I pretty much saw the whole game, It was a good decision. 2 goals, a man of the match performance.
Yeah, I think Rodgers wanted a bit of familiarity. There obviously a lot more into it that we probably don't know about, but I think for Hatate, a lot of people will read into it, but uh, I think he wants a bit of familiarity. Rodgers, he knows David Turnbull, he knows the way he plays, and let's be honest, Turnbull never got that opportunity under Ange Postecoglou. And I think Rodgers was just after a bit of familiarity. He's in the pre-season where he's worked with players, but you're saying that at the same time. Excuse me. You're saying that at the same time, by saying to yourself that if you start rejigging things and trying other things out, it could come to haunt you. I'll be honest with you, it's maybe a case that Brendan doesn't know his best team yet, or he doesn't know where to fit players within the system. That's probably why Tate maybe wasn't playing, and that's maybe completely understandable. Because I'm still expecting a lot of changes to take place within the Celtic squad. We'll obviously come on to it, but Starfelt looks as although he's played his last game for Celtic, of course, because he looks as although he'll be away fairly imminently. But yeah, comfortable enough after for Celtic, but you're going to be ultra critical about Celtic, not because they're a good side or a top side, one of Scottish football's better sides, but you're going to be ultra critical because for Celtic to be deemed serious this season, you'd want them to be ruthless. You'd want them to be ruthless. And they were 3-0 up, and Malky Mackay touched on it after the game where he had to go and avoid damage limitation. And that, even after half time, it was still the perfect opportunity for Celtic to go and kick on it and get a few more goals and make it a lot more resounding. And I've listened to a few Celtic podcasts last night, and they all said exactly the same thing, where they're happy they've won the game. And they felt the score was a little bit harsh on them in terms of they could have won by a few more, but exactly the same time they're a little bit disappointed that their goal return wasn't a lot more than anticipated. So I think for Celtic, it's job done. I think the performance was very, very good, and that's what a lot of people like to see in football nowadays. They like to see a good performance, so that's part one ticked. But for a side like Celtic, they will want to remain fairly consistent in terms of breaking teams down, in terms of getting chances away, in terms of getting opportunities into the final third, all that kind of stuff. And 4 goals to the name. And let's be honest, it could have been a more rocky night for Ross County. They obviously had a penalty shout where Simon Murray was brought down by Joe Hart. And let's be honest, I think Joe Hart had one of his poorer performances yesterday. I think he's been a good goalkeeper for Celtic, Joe Hart, but I think he had one of his poorer performances yesterday. A few examples, as I've alluded to, that shout with Simon Murray. And then I think he needs to command his area better with the first goal for Ross County through the corner that Jordan White converts. And yeah, I think when you take that into consideration, I think it's a poor afternoon all round. I mean, it won't get documented on as such because uh, obviously they won the game and were fairly comfortable, and it wasn't although it was one of those embarrassing afternoons that have resembled Celtic beforehand when the Staggies have came up to Glasgow. But yeah, when you take the game into great detail, you'll be a bit disappointed defensively. And I still think Brendan Rodgers has to make some reinforcements defensively. I still don't think that Celtic are a complete package, and I think Brendan Rodgers needs to spend the next month getting a few things sorting out his best 11. Also looking at reshuffling the pack and see where he's at, where everybody can fit into the structure, how they can get back to the good Ange Postecoglou days, how they can get back to the first time Brendan Rodgers days, and make sure they're a better formidable presence whenever they're in the Champions League this season. Because let's be honest, from a Scottish football perspective, we already got a bit of a fright when obviously Hibs almost got knocked out in Andorra when they beat 2-1 just 10 days ago. We don't want the same fortune this season where we're on shows like this and we're saying Giovanni Van Bronckhorst should be getting sacked. Now, I got absolutely slaughtered by the pundits on the show that night question when I was questioning Giovanni's integrity regarding staying at Ibrox, and so it proved to be because within a matter of days he obviously left. And that I wasn't the only one that was coming on platforms such as this and saying it. There was platforms such as Clyde One Super Scoreboard and all rival media channels that were coming out and saying exactly the same thing as well. So And then from a Celtic point of view, that would have been the one black mark against Ange Postecoglou, the fact that they didn't do well in Europe. I'd love to know, I don't have stats in front of me, but Ange Postecoglou's probably only won 2 European games, maybe 3 or 4, if we're going to be very fortunate about it. But yeah, that just goes to show it. And Brendan Rodgers' European records flat to deceive as well, because that was another black mark. A black mark for Rodgers was the way, the magnitude that he left Glasgow to go and join Leicester City. Obviously, all the events that happened after that, such as his family's home getting broken into, is quite simply disgraceful. But at exactly the same time, he's back, and the Green Brigade got a bad name in Scottish football from majority of the fan bases around the country. But when you look at them in great detail, it just shows you how baffling this appointment was of Brendan Rodgers when the Green Brigade aren't willing to turn up. I mean, James Forrest is a testimonial. They were like an absolute stalwart Celtic Football Club, yet the Green Brigade aren't turning out for that. And I'm not willing to make this show about the Green Brigade, but I think it's very valuable points that are made, because, yes, although Celtic won yesterday, there's still certain bits of criticism about things both on and off the park at this precise moment in time.
I mean, watching the game yesterday, and to be fair, a lot of Celtic fans that I kind of looked at as well were saying the same thing as what I was thinking last night as a Hearts fan. They were 3-0 up in the first half, but didn't really deserve to be, because for long parts in that first half, I thought Ross County were excellent, set up really well. They really got at Celtic. As you mentioned, couldn't have been a penalty for Simon Murray going round Hart. Maybe not a lot of contact there. But I said in the group chat, if I was Malky Mackay, I'd be raging at Josh Sims for making that daft challenge on Greg Taylor, because that put Celtic 1-0 up in a game that they weren't playing well in. And then you know what Celtic are like, they're going to score goals. But Ross County, for long spells in that game yesterday, were excellent.
Yeah, no, absolutely good. I thought they were excellent. And Malky Mackay made a rather interesting point after the game on live television, because he went and said, had we been a European side, I'll give you an example. Had we been Marseille, right? Had we been Marseille, just to give you a prime example, he didn't say that, but I'll say it from my perspective. If Ross County had been Marseille, I think Ross County would have been 2-0 up or 2-1 up yesterday, because, as I've alluded to, Celtic were nowhere near their best yesterday. 1-4-2, that's obviously a good analogy to have in football. It's a good sign and a good starting point, a good benchmark to see where you're at. But exactly at the same time, Celtic fans want standards, the man standards, they want high standards, both defensively and offensively. And Ross County snuffed them out in every possible opportunity. James Brown had a great game, as you say. I think Ross County is the perfect move for James Brown to try and get his place at the Republic of Ireland squad. Jan Danda, I think his performance at Parkhead yesterday will do his confidence no favour, a lot of favours, whatsoever, because I can't see him being at Stargaze for long. I can't see him leaving imminently, but what I will say is I think he'll be away very, very shortly. I like the idea that English players come to Scottish football and use it as a grounding point, a springboard to move on to bigger and better things within the game. So full credit to Jan for that. I think Ross County will be a better team this season. I just think Malky Mackay, he'll go and speak in the press and say budgets, whatever have you, and that's all fine and well. I just think Malky Mackay was missing a bit of a balance last season. He's kind of getting that this season. He's went to his Highland roots to go and get that, like his signed Jay Henderson, who was very impressive in the Championship for Cali last season. Scott Allardyce, undoubtedly a leader for Cali. Is it Kyle McLean? Arguably one of the better players in the Championship for Partick last year. So they've recruited very, very well. But also, Eamon Brophy on a permanent deal is a very good signing. He hit the ground running fairly early in Dingwall, but never quite materialised the way either party would have wanted it to. But hopefully, we have a bit of stability now that he can kick on. So I think Ross County will be in a better place this season. Will they be in the threat of relegation? That's the $1 million question for me, because I do think Ross County will be a better fortress than Dingwall. That's what served Malky Mackay tremendously well in his first season. The reason why they got top 6 football was because of the fact that they were very, very strong at home. And then obviously they got some big ones away from home, like Batordre, the one at Dundee, I think the one at Tannadice, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So they managed to get some absolutely massive wins. But I think it's a big season for Malky because I think Roy McGregor was kind of putting him under pressure, especially after they could beat by Hearts. They could obviously beat 6-1 by Hearts. And I was reading comments in the paper, and it sounded as although Malky was under pressure, it would have been very easy for Roy McGregor to have went and sacked him to in a panic mode to obviously rescue their season and make sure they win the Premiership this season. But in all credit to Ross County, they're run the right way. Roy does a lot of work behind the scenes. They put a lot into it, and they're getting the rewards. And I think better rewards for them will come. I think the proof of the pudding for them will come this Saturday when they play St Johnstone, because when you look at that game in question, the Saints game on Saturday, the Saints are quite simply in disarray right now. And you look at that and say, if you go and win that, then it gives you a grounding board, a grounding point, and it gives you an opportunity to move on for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we had the Ross County fan Ross on the show on Friday, and I said that it was a kind of free hit for Ross County going to Celtic Park, first game of the season. Maybe not expecting a lot there, but there's a lot of positives they could take from yesterday. And you mentioned one of them just there, Jan Danda. I thought he was excellent yesterday. You touched about the fact that you don't think he'll be there much longer. Could you, obviously won't be at Celtic or Rangers, but could you see him at potentially a Hearts, a Hibs or Aberdeen? Is he that type of player that could go there and kind of fit in quite easily?
I think he would do a job at Hearts or Hibs in particular. I'm not so sure about Aberdeen because of the way Barry Robson plays, to be perfectly honest with you, but I think he could do a job at Hearts or Hibs. If there's anywhere he's going to go, I think he'll go to England. I think if Jan Danda does leave Hearts, he'll go to. Sorry, I think if Jan Danda leaves Ross County, I think he would go to probably an English League One club. I wouldn't see him joining another Scottish club. Not because of the way Ross County operate or agents or whatever have you. I just think he'll want to try and prove himself in England again, because he was rejected at Liverpool, he was rejected at Swansea, and I think he would use English football as an opportunity to rejuvenate himself again. And after a good couple of years positively in Scotland, I think he would want to go back to England and show everybody what he's all about.
Yeah, in regards to Celtic, we know they've got such quality. You know, again, they talked on the TV last night about Kyogo. Again, his movement is fantastic. But I want to touch on David Turnbull. Now, it's very difficult to break into that Celtic team. He's found it very hard because they've got a lot of quality. Do you think now that David Turnbull can kick on at Celtic and show the kind of player that we know he is, because he's got undoubted ability? He's just not been able to show it because Celtic have got such quality. So can David Turnbull now kick on at Celtic?
As you've brought up the point, I'm going to start with Kyogo before I go into Turnbull. And I think Kyogo, there was a lot of speculation, and it would have been completely and absolutely very easy for Kyogo Furuhashi to have left Celtic when Ange Postecoglou did, because there's obviously that Japanese terminology established in Celtic because of the way Ange works, the way he looked at it, the way he took full advantage of the market in Asia. But Kyogo seems to be a new man under Brendan Rodgers. As we didn't think Kyogo could have set it up any longer. He's stepped up that standard even more. Because let's be honest, it's a new season, it's a new manager. Well, although Brendan Rodgers is a familiar factor within Celtic Football Club, but it's a new Kyogo for the Hash as well. And there's obviously been a lot of times where he's played out wide, and that's not his best esteemed position. He's better through the middle, and that proved to be yesterday, because he gave Ross County absolute havoc. And I think he needs a good month at his disposal before the international break, and then obviously the Champions League games come along, because if he can do that, then he'll be in a very, very good, strong place. So Kyogo is obviously doing extremely well for himself, and long may that continue from his perspective. But on to David Turnbull, and I think as far as Turnbull's concerned, well, he's done himself no harm after yesterday, because that was a very, very good and established performance yesterday. He got a lot of it. He claimed himself yesterday, and that was a pleasing thing as far as David Turnbull's concerned. He needs to keep that going, but as I said to you earlier, Graham, I think he's used to the way Brendan Rodgers works. I think he's got that familiarity about him, and I think that's going to be absolutely massive. And I think the way Brendan Rodgers likes to play, it suits Turnbull, because Ange Postecoglou is very, very much ruthless in terms of balls at the channels, ask questions, get balls into the box, and we're always going to hurt them with the quality we've got in the final third. With Rodgers, we're laborious in a good way, but also alongside that, we obviously seen how got a lot of joy. Well, obviously, Scott Brown was still there when Brendan Rodgers was there the first time, and you've seen how, Rodgers and McGregor would come a bit isolated in terms of how they played sometimes because obviously of the way Brendan likes to play his football. But whenever they were called upon, they were always first to balls. They were always sharper than the opposition. They were always in your face. And I'm getting that feeling. I'm getting that feeling about David Turnbull. I'm getting the feeling that he wants players are going to get into opposition players' faces and create that high press because it's not something that players like. And I think he needed a big season. There was a lot of clamour for David Turnbull to perhaps go to England last term to be a bit like Ryan Christie, where we obviously knew the impact that Ryan Christie had in the East End of Glasgow, but he went to Bournemouth probably because he knew he reached a shelf point in Celtic. A lot of folk thought that with Turnbull as well, but never quite escalated that way. And I think that was a hugely important aspect as far as Turnbull was concerned. Turnbull had to wait his turn. He had to knock at the door, but then he was always called upon, and he was always a reliable figure in the Celtic ship. And I think that was absolutely important as far as he was concerned. But he's a huge player now, and there's a lot of big games coming up for Celtic, so he's going to be a fairly influential player. I'm interested to see how he gets on next Sunday when he plays against Shinnie, because that's going to be a very good battle. The way Turnbull plays, he'll look to find holes, because as much as Shinnie is a very good leader and he reads the game very cleverly, he's also not good at picking up holes. And I'm interested to see Aberdeen in the midfield area next week, because I'm thinking about going to the Celtic game. I'm interested to see how they get on, because Noel Ramadani is a huge hole in that Aberdeen midfield. I'll obviously touch upon Aberdeen later on the show, but I think Noel Ramadani is a huge hole filler as far as Aberdeen are concerned in midfield.
I raised this point to Michael and Laurie on Friday, and I'm going to ask you as well. Now, this might not happen, so I'm not saying it will, but I was thinking a couple of days ago, the Saudi market, transfer market, doesn't close for another couple of months. The Scottish market shuts in September. Is there a worry that somebody from Saudi Arabia might come in with a bag of money for like a Kyogo or somebody else and take them away? And there's nothing you can do because the Saudi money is mental. Is there an issue that might happen?
I would say so. So just thinking about it, just listening to your question there, I would say so, because I think for Kyogo, it's going to be an interesting one to see what the valuation is, because in my honest opinion, if you were asking me right now what the valuation is for Kyogo Furuhashi, I would say 15 to 20 million. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100% I would.
15 to 20 million. If you're a Celtic lawyer, or to be understand that, I don't think Peter Lawler has any say in terms of how everything involves at Celtic now, because he's also still got a big affiliation to the club in his respective role. But I don't think he really deals with Brendan Rodgers on a day-to-day basis, because I'm led to believe that was one of the main reasons behind Rodgers wanted to leave the last time he was obviously in the East End of Glasgow. So it's going to be an interesting one there. But I think now, Celtic have a better understanding of the market. I think the players that Ange Postecoglou's took has been very, very good. And I thought when Ange left, that was maybe the end of Celtic. I thought they were going to go more local or more European in their pursuit of players, but no, they've obviously taken the Woki, and he's been a very good acquisition indeed. And I think the next few months is going to be rather telling to see where Brendan Rodgers is going with his latest project at Celtic, even though it's the second spell, because if players such as Hatate and Kyogo want to leave, then that suggests to me that Brendan Rodgers wants to have a sense of comfort in terms of the players he's working with and the players he's with and the way he wants to play and all that. Because if he goes with the current and sits in a good position with it and stays comfortable with it, then you look at that and say, okay, fine, he's obviously he's obviously going for a tried and trusted approach. But if Brendan Rodgers starts using these next 4 weeks to start bringing in 6 to 8 players, and as I said, I think he's still got unfinished business in the transfer market. If he goes about bringing in 6 to 8 players, then you'll look at that from the outside looking in, and you'll say to yourself, yeah, he wants to mould his own idea at the Celtic side. Yeah, he wants to get his own way of playing, and he wants to do it his own way, which can be part and parcel of football management. And yeah, I think that's the way he'll go down. But for me, Kyogo Furuhashi, it's going to be another fascinating one because Celtic have Champions League money, but exactly at the same time, Celtic need to be better on a European level as well. Does that 15 to 20 million for Kyogo Furuhashi help massively? I think it does. It wouldn't exactly be a popular choice for Celtic fans, him leaving, or indeed if Kyogo Furuhashi was still leaving, they were to start bringing in English Premier League rejects or English Premier League has-beens but are nobodies now, like they did in the past, maybe Robbie Keanes and Craig Bellamy's or whatever have you, although that was a long, long time ago. But even Celtic were doing it as recently as a few years ago when Lennon was in charge. With apologies for any Celtic fans here, but Shane Duffy, that was an absolute laughing stock in Lennox, that was for sure. But yeah, I think Celtic are in a totally different position now. And I think if you were to ask me, I think Celtic should cash in, but cash in to help the football department and make sure that there's enough quality in there to be a better proposition in the Champions League this season, definitely.
At Easter Road, it's coming up for half time. It's still Hibernian 0, St Mirren 2, so a really good start to the season so far for St Mirren. But just very quickly, Dave, we all gave our predictions on Friday on the show, and we all pretty much said that Celtic could win the league. I think you put in the group chat that you think Celtic will win the league as well. Do you think it will be tighter this season, or do you think Celtic will be comfortable winners?
I'm not reading much of yesterday's result here, Graham, but I do think it will be comfortable enough. There's a lot of journalists coming out in the media just now and saying it's uncertain. I disagree with that because Brendan Rodgers is a very internal man in terms of how he operates. What I mean by that is he doesn't give a lot away to the press. Michael Beale seems to be open and transparent with the press, which is not a bad thing, I may add. It's not a bad thing by such imagination because the press absolutely lick their hands when they see that. They absolutely love that. But at exactly the same time, there's a lot of the background, like he gets asked about transfers or whatever have you. He'll say something along the lines of there's work going on in the background, which is basically a hint that such and such player is coming in. I don't know if you agree, Graham, but I think there's been too much for rebuild at Rangers. But also, we'll get onto it because it's a very relevant story for now, considering we're speaking about Celtic. But I do have no other thoughts on Rangers, purely from a Scottish football perspective. But we'll get onto them fairly imminently.
Yeah, we're going to get onto them now, actually, because let's go to Rugby Park, which was a late game yesterday. And as always, when one of the big Glasgow 2 loses, the big story is them losing. We will get to Rangers shortly, but for me yesterday, Dave, Kilmarnock were outstanding. I think the signings that McInnes have brought in have been brilliant. 3 of those defensively yesterday. I thought Robbie D, Stuart Finlay and Lewis New were outstanding, with Matty Kennedy and Marley Watkins as well being excellent. Again, like I said, the big story is going to be Rangers, but Kilmarnock were superb yesterday.
Well, definitely. Apologies for being on my phone, but I'll try and get a few more views here. But I think in terms of yesterday, indeed, yeah, I think Kilmarnock showed a wee bit of a different side to them. I mean, McInnes is a very, very good summer. I think he's shown what we all knew about Aberdeen, because when he was at Aberdeen, that was obviously a very good summer in terms of the work that he did. He had a very good summer. He had a very good tenure, at Pittodrie. And when you take things into consideration, obviously how things are all unfolding at Rugby Park, they had to be better. McInnes admitted it after the game yesterday. I think that they had to say goodbye to a lot of good people inside the building, both in terms of coaching staff, office staff, and players. That the changes they've brought in have been absolutely beneficial. I think they had to go make the changes they did. Going to Tony Docherty, of course, going to Dundee, which we'll do also know it was in the pipeline for a while, considering the whole time constraints behind everything. But yeah, I think, as you say, I think Stuart Finlay was the start of what was the second stone for Kilmarnock, because Stuart Finlay, one from Oxford, was a very good sign to start things off. And then Marlon Watkins was just never going to get a chance at Aberdeen this season. Who else? Brad Lyons, very good player, well respected for Northern Irish football, as I've alluded to. And then midfield wise, very good. They've got rid of players such as Alan Power. He's went to for Morton. Let's be honest, a player like Alan Power just wouldn't suit the way Kelly play now. So they've took players in the correct areas. They've got the correct formula and they've got the correct blends. So that's obviously a good thing to have. But Kelly had show a bit of resilience yesterday, which you're always going to do against a side like Rangers. You're going to do it against Celtic as well. But we'll get on to Rangers in a minute, but I'll start with Kelly because they were very, very good defensively. It wasn't one of those park the bus games that you normally resemble with Derek because you normally resonate Derek McInnes by parking the bus against not just Old Firm for that precise matter, parking the bus against pretty much everybody, but yet winning the game. There wasn't an element of that yesterday, I felt. Yesterday there was a tinge of it, but not the full element. And Rangers had chances, but there wasn't many occasions in which the Kelly goalie was really, really worked, in all honesty. And then the goal comes along for Kelly. It's a very well worked move, and the Lions converts it away with ease. And it's not the dream start for Rangers, but Kelly, there are a lot of people's expectations, and ambitions to finish in the top six. And I think Derek McInnes has done that no harm. I think Kelly could be a good shout for European football this season, not in terms of finishing third, but probably in terms of breaking into the top six and doing well in the final split to see themselves over the line.
Well, I was on another podcast a few days ago, and I was asked who I thought my overachievers would be this season, and I did say Kilmarnock. I think they've signed very, very well. I think they look a really decent side, especially at home. Maybe they weren't great last season, but the signings they made have been very impressive. I think the one thing they do need, Dave, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, I think our colleague Laurie, who's a Kilmarnock fan, might agree though, they need more in the forward areas. They don't really have much up there. Is that the maybe one position they need to try and strengthen before this window shuts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kyle Vizell's a good forward, but he's not going to be the forward that will go and score you 20, 25 goals that would maybe give Kilmarnock that bit of breathing space, and would maybe help Kelly get a top six position. But I think they need a certain identity of forward. The days of Chris Boyd, the days in which we see Chris Boyd in terms of how he was approached in the 6-yard area are long gone. Maybe a Willie Malt is the only exception to that in terms of how he plays the game then. I don't think a Kyle Lafferty-like signing would help. I don't think it would help. Kyle Lafferty will know the character that he possesses and the traits that he possesses. But I don't think a Kyle Lafferty like signing would help. I think they need a pacey forward. I think they need a forward that has a bit of pace. It's going to ask opposition defences questions and is going to provide an absolute live wire. For me, I think that would be a good partnership rather than having a situation where you've got two 6'3" forwards and they're both just going to chase onto lost causes and long balls. I think they need a pacey attacker to go and more or less coordinate with Vassell, and I think Kilmarnock would get a good bit of run for that. For me, though, I think that would be the first article as far as Kilmarnock are concerned in terms of the squad, because they've got rid of all the deficiencies they have defensively. Obviously, there's still much more tougher tests to come, but I think Kilmarnock are nowhere near the side they were defensively. Ash Taylor, let's be honest, is too overwhelming a player. A lot of people read too much into Ash Taylor because of how he's been captain at both Aberdeen and Motherwell. I know from an Aberdeen fans' point of view, I didn't have much animosity towards him, but I know certain Aberdeen fans and perhaps Kilmarnock fans to a certain extent as well had a bit of friction and animosity towards him, not in a violent or bad way, but in terms of just the way he plays. And then I also think that midfield-wise, they've got the perfect blend, and up front they've got they're maybe just one or two players short. If they can get them players out, they'll be a very, side this season, definitely.
Too many times when you beat Celtic and Rangers is sometimes called lucky or maybe a bit fortunate. The other teams had a load of chances. You just get a break of the ball and score. I didn't get that feeling with Kilmarnock yesterday. I thought they deserved that one. And what I really liked was the fact their work rate and energy was really impressive. And you mentioned him earlier. You said Marley Watkins wasn't getting much of a chance at Aberdeen. Do you think he could be a really big player for Kilmarnock this season? Because again, I thought his work rate and energy yesterday was fantastic.
Absolutely, there's obviously a familiarity with Marley Watkins and McInnes because McInnes knows him first hand, having worked with him at Tawdry. I think Watkins has got a big season in his hands because, let's be honest, he falls into the I only work with familiar managers category because he never quite materialised under Stephen Glass, he never quite materialised under Robson. But Robson in particular plays a very certain way. And Glass, even although the whole thing was just sheer capitulation and sheer dismay, the whole thing with Glass was basically experience and put a huge amount of reliance on Christian Ramirez, which worked to a certain extent, but it was always going to peter out, and so it proved to be. So I think in terms of Watkins, I think he's got a big season in his hands. I think he's going into the right environment at Kilmarnock. I think he's going to an environment that deserves a lot of plaudits. But from a Rangers point of view, I'm going to set this up fairly nicely, Graham. I listened to the Rangers review last night, and one of the journalists on there was speaking about synthetic pitches and how we should play in the top flight. I agree with that point of view, and I understand why clubs like Kilmarnock and Livingston have them, because it helps their community development, it helps like community trusts and all that in terms of Kilmarnock will gain a lot of Kilmarnock and Livingston, will gain a lot of revenue as a result of that. So will Hamilton, I beg your pardon. Falkirk, because they've also got notable synthetic pitches as well. But at exactly the same time, I don't agree into this whole notion because as much as it's a valid point, it is an excuse as well. It's an excuse as well. We'll go back to this annual Glasgow side gets beat on a synthetic pitch. Let's just go and make a huge hoorah out of it.
No, I think you're right. I think it does get used quite a lot as an excuse, and I think Rangers can't really have one yesterday. They were outworked, outplayed. I thought Kilmarnock with a far better side and getting into Rangers. They handed debuts to Jack Butland, the goalkeeper, Kieran Dowell, Seema, Dessers and Lammers. I heard a lot of Rangers fans on Twitter and a few things as well. They were not impressed with a lot of Rangers' new signings. They had Danilo on the bench. It can be difficult to bring new players in and for them to settle. You mentioned it earlier. You think there's been too much of a rebuild? I've got to say, I agree with you. I think yesterday Rangers looked devoid of ideas and have a lot of pacing behind, and they were just very, very flat.
Yeah, I don't obviously follow Rangers to the same extent that I follow Aberdeen. I'm a passionate Aberdeen fan, by the way, just to clarify. But I think Rangers' pre-season programme as well was a little bit debilitated because it was maybe the right way to go about it in terms of playing bounce games, getting an opportunity to get some game time at the players. But then there's a lot of Rangers fans reading too much at the pre-season, which I didn't quite agree with because obviously I think it's quite an irrelevant thing to look at because it's not the real ball, let's be honest, and it is an opportunity for managers to go and try out things. But the point of Olympiacos, who are a decent European outfit, as we both know, they played Newcastle, who are a Champions League side now and anyhow because of their financial backing. And they also played Hoffenheim and Hamburg. Hamburg are a decent Bundesliga side, and so are Hoffenheim. They're both established Bundesliga outfits or Bundesliga 2 outfits. So it was tough, but at exactly the same time, for me, if I was a Rangers supporter, I'd have been looking for Michael Beale to have perhaps played an English Championship side, just to give you a certain example. Try and win the game 2 or 3-0. Try and get a bit of confidence into the players. I understand how they played harder opposition to try and warm them up for Championship games, which is absolutely humongous now for Rangers in the aspect of it becomes season defining. I'd argue that this next month before the Old Firm game, first Old Firm instalment of the season, is season defining as far as Rangers are concerned. Servette Wednesday, which will not be an easy task whatsoever for Rangers because obviously they beat Genk. And I remember our fellow colleague, Regan Stevenson, was thinking Genk would win this comfortably. And I was actually winding them up. And I wasn't expecting Servette to win, by the way. So huge kudos to them for that. So Champions League's massive because anything short, I hate to say the phrase failure, but in terms of Beale, he would need a huge reaction and fast if he gets beat on Wednesday. And then they go and play a few more Premiership games. And let's be honest, they're playing catch up already. I know Michael Beale's given it the winning game 1 of 38. And that's so fine and well saying that. At exactly the same time, you get momentum. And if you get beaten opening day of the season, that momentum can easily burst quite quickly. And so it proved to be. And in terms of Beale, I watched the press conference yesterday, last night after the game. I don't know if you watched it, but I watched the game. I didn't think the journalists were being too hard hit on Michael Beale. I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't a great performance from Rangers. I'd have liked the journalists to have had a bit more oomph about their questioning. Whilst it did feel like that from watching it on the television or indeed on YouTube, it didn't feel like that way. Had I been in the spot, I'd have been questioning the manager every possible way. And I know how football works. I know how the fact that it is quite precarious. But at exactly the same time, as you've alluded to, the youth signs haven't gelled. And for me, I don't think yesterday was the correct game to field so much youth signs in. I'd have fielded the correct calibre of signing in. I didn't think it needed every single ounce of youth signing to mould their way into the starting lineup and once again find themselves with a mountain to climb.
If you look at the goal that they lost as well through Brad Lyons, it's very poor defending from Rangers. It's a long throw in from Watson. Lundstrom lets the ball bounce in front of him. Suter can't react, and it's a good finish from Brad Lyons, don't get me wrong. But is that a worry for Rangers that they couldn't even defend a simple throw-in and they've lost their goal through it?
Yeah, but as I said in the press conference about that game, nobody's touched that in the press conference to Michael Beale. Nobody's asked him throw in. What do you think about that? And Michael Beale hasn't even referenced it in this press conference either. Which, from a fan's point of view, you read a wee bit into press conferences, and understandably so, but you like to think as a journalist you should be asking the right questions about the tactical and analysis side of it. There's two, for me in football, and I'm not trying to criticise journalists here, by the way, because I'm a journalist myself, of course, even though I don't like to imply on it. But for me, I like to be tactical when I speak to managers. I think you get a good response being tactical with managers. Because, yeah, they won't want to divulge every single ounce of your answer. But at exactly the same time, they know exactly what you're going on about. And secondly, they want to show respect to your question. So that's why they'll appreciate it. But, I mean, as you say, I'll go back on your point. They didn't throw in. It was basic in terms of defensively. And then Brad Lyons gets a bit of time to go and sneak the ball into the net. And let's be honest, football has changed in terms of the defensive capabilities now as it has 10, 15 years ago. But at exactly the same time, when you play youth football, for example, you're told at training sessions, or you're told before games, or you're told in adult football, even at amateur level, stay close to your man, right? You're marking number 9 for opposition team. Stay close to him, don't give him a chance. You'll win the game, or you'll be comfortable within the game. So you'd like to think the basic principles of play would be jeered into Rangers players' faces, but it's not how it was to be. It's another disappointing outcome, and yeah, I think Beale needs a big reaction now. But as I say, I think the next few games are season defining because, which is a bit premature perhaps for me to go out and say, but at exactly the same time, you don't want the season petering out by Christmas time and Celtic winning the league by March because, let's be honest, we need a competitive Scottish Premiership because if we don't, we're quite simply going to fail on European level as we nearly got a fight about recently.
We all know, and I think I mentioned this to Michael and Laurie on Friday night there, that we all know that finishing second in Glasgow is not good enough. you've already said it there as well. They're playing catch up already. They've already lost 3 points. There's a lot of Rangers fans who are still not overly convinced by Michael Beale. These signings are going to probably take time to gel, which they really don't need. They need to get them settled in quickly. How much pressure is Michael Beale under this season to deliver that title back to Ibrox again?
Massive. And when Ange Postecoglou left Celtic, I know there was also all the speculation that came after that with Brendan Rodgers coming in, and the whole thing happened very quickly. It evolved quite quickly. It was quite fluid. But a lot of Rangers fans were delighted when Ange Postecoglou left the club because they thought it was their time again. Let's be honest. Have Rangers been very, very good in the last 12 years? Let's be honest. No, they haven't. They've reached a European final. That's really all they've done. And don't even count the time they won the league title, because let's be honest, Celtic were all over the place. The league was won a match. If it was a final day, both sides had won 30, drawn 5, and lost 3 or something, you could say fair enough, they deserve to win the league and all that. But let's be honest, Celtic were all over the place the COVID season. With the exception of the European final, and that season probably in question, because let's be honest, they probably had just a little bit too much for the league because all their attention was in European football. Apart from that, probably you could argue the last time Rangers had a good season apart from that, arguably would be when it was pre-admin days. And that, I know that sounds brutal, but at exactly the same time, I think it's harsh. I think it's a harsh reality. But I also think that's where Rangers are at right now. That's the reality check barometer. Can they reach those standards again of not European finals, but being close to Celtic, being in European football, not in terms of reaching finals, as I said, but in terms of getting into good knockout stages, like maybe the last 16 quarter final, doing well, maybe in the Champions League. That would be deemed success for Rangers now. Winning the league title would be deemed success, just to clarify before I get Rangers fans absolutely slaughtering me. But I'd also argue that by saying they need to do well in Europe as well, which is why Servette over the next 2 weeks becomes absolutely massive now. And for me, Michael Beale doesn't know his best 11 yet. Why? Because he's moving players on, he's taking players in, and he's rebuilding. But also, there's a lack of balance just now. I think, as we've touched upon Kelly and the fact they had a balance, and that's what I think it came down to. There wasn't any class from either side in terms of there wasn't any 30-yard screamers or anything like that. It's just Kilmarnock had a better balance and a better composure within the game to go win the game 1-0.
Just going back to Kilmarnock as well, something I mentioned to Laurie on Friday as well, and I completely agree with this point as well. Derek McInnes mentioned a couple of days ago about the fact that it's crazy that Kilmarnock won the Viaplay Cup group, but they weren't seeded. I agree with that point. I don't understand why they weren't seeded. Could you understand where he's coming from when he mentioned that?
It's funny because I'm trying to be a bit intelligent with this here. I'm trying to think of what results Kilmarnock had, because I think it came down to goal difference. Because they beat Dunfermline 1-0. They beat Albion Rovers 2-1. Rafe won in penalties, but it was a 1-each draw. And who would the other one have been? I'm trying to remember who else they would have played. It was Aaron, wasn't it? And that was 4-0. So I can take Laurie's point, absolutely. Yeah, thinking about it now, I can take his point. Yeah, I think that was rather poor. I think it was rather poor as far as Kelly were concerned. And I think the Viaplay Cup was extremely relevant in terms of seeding. I think it was extremely relevant in terms of who Kilmarnock fared, how they fared, should I say, sorry. At exactly the same time, they've got a tough game coming up in a couple of weeks' time. That's why Kilmarnock fans are probably a little bit disappointed by the whole outcome and the whole seeding situation.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let's move on to someone that I'm not disappointed about, and that was Hearts, who went to Perth yesterday and won by 2-0. A goal from Oda, 75 minutes, and Lawrence Shanklin starting the season well with a goal after 96 minutes, although he couldn't really miss, to be honest. But I'll come on to Hearts in a second, because I want to talk about them for a long time. I'm joking, I don't really. But Let us start with St Johnstone. Now, going into this game, Dave, St Johnstone had a horrendous season so far. The signings weren't particularly great. They made a few more now. They were hammered by Stirling Albion last week. Again, I mentioned the fact that on Friday we talked about the predictions, and all of us went for St Johnstone to go down, as a lot of other pundits have as well. Do you see any positives for St Johnstone this season, or do you think they already look doomed?
They look doomed already. I'll give you a certain example of this. St Johnstone had tried to get their player. I'm not going to name the player because he hasn't joined the club yet. St Johnstone looked to get their player that's on the verge of joining Dundee, and they were quite simply outbid. So it's not just an on the performance. It's not just a performance scenario to this. There's also a financial scenario to this. Let's be honest, Johnston aren't in a good place or further off the park. Livingston have that undoubtedly one of the lowest budgets within the Scottish Premiership. Yet David Martindale has come out and been very honest to the media about that. Stephen McLean, it's about having showdown meetings with players. I mean, they were in half an hour to 40 minutes allegedly after the meet with Stirling Albion, which was justifiable in my ad, but at exactly the same time, it's uncalled for in today's football world because the game has gone a lot more modern as we well truly know about. Yesterday was going to be an interesting one because what was the reaction going to be like after that? Hearts were nowhere near convincing. And that just goes to show you where both teams are at right now, probably, if I'm going to be brutally honest with you. Johnston were obviously going to offer no goal threat, whilst defensively they were going to have a certain level of structure. But it's when you play sides like Hearts, it's it's basically impossible to hold out for the full 90 minutes and have that defensive understanding of each other. Defensive diligence is something that Aberdeen tried to do when they played Celtic last year. That worked for 87 minutes until Celtic opened the crack. Celtic cracked it open, yes, and obviously took the game and scruff of the neck and won by a goal to nil. That was never the case this time around, and yeah, that just goes to show you where St Johnstone are at this precise moment in time. For Hearts, it wasn't one of those turn up and win scenarios because that was what it was like at Gayfield on Friday between Arbroath and Dundee United. But perhaps had to show a certain level of resilience, but they were always going to have enough composure, dignity, authority. They were always going to have enough experience to go win the game, and so it proved to be.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I watched the game yesterday. First half was awful. It was a dreadful game of football, to be honest. St Johnstone had a couple of chances. Liam Gordon had a chance they maybe should score. I thought they defended really well. They basically defended very deep, didn't let us get in behind, which was good. But they had no real threat going forward. Stevie May pretty much marshalled very well. Second half, they offered nothing. So I think if I'm a St Johnstone fan, I'm very worried about the fact that for me going forward, they've got nothing up front apart from Stevie May. Graham Carey put a couple of great balls in the box, but apart from that, they look devoid of ideas going forward. And I have to talk about as well, and this might get talked about a lot as well. What did you think of the appointment of Stephen McLean in the first place? Because I found it very strange. He was a great player, don't get me wrong, but he's very inexperienced as a manager. Did you think that was the right appointment? And I've already said in a couple of podcasts that I've been on as well, I think McLean will be the first one to go this season. I just don't think it's going to last very long. So what's your thoughts on Stephen McLean? You're on mute, mate.
Well, it's funny that actually, Graham, because I was actually saying Lee Johnston. I was thinking Lee Johnston might have been the first one until he actually went and turned it around in Thursday night because had he not won that on Thursday night, he'd have been away before the season even started in the Premiership. Let's be very, very honest with ourselves on that front. The appointment of Stephen McLean was very, I hate to say the word cheap, but it was very local in the aspect of they gave him a bit of time to obviously take temporary charge. He gave them a bit of life, but yeah, being a temporary manager to being permanent manager is two totally different situations. Because I got told a certain stat Friday that I'll come on to later on the show because it doesn't allude to St Johnstone. It alludes to my team, which I'll come on to. And the whole temporary and permanent manager thing is a rather interesting one because you can be a very, very good temporary manager and then you can be a permanent manager and it just doesn't materialise. And exactly the same time, you can be a very rubbish temporary manager and a very good permanent manager. Now, the former, which I mentioned, that's exactly how it's turned out to be because, let's be honest, Johnston got a bit of leeway as a result of obviously doing so well in the split period. They did enough, of course, and got some massive results, and that was hugely, hugely important. But Johnston probably have ran their course now, and there's a lot of change, obviously, off the park, which is instrumental to how a football club runs. So, yeah, it's never a good look. For me, Steve McLean wasn't right. Very sorry to take a job. No, the Carl Davis quite simply had to go. And I'm saying that because it was becoming a bit of an unpopular vibe with Mr. Johnston fans. Not in terms of Carl Davis individual, because Carl Davis individual is a lovely guy, and obviously he gave them a piece of history that could never be forgotten about. But the style of football was beginning to give St Johnstone fans a few headaches, and that was what was worrying people a lot more rather than the previous history in terms of being successful. McLean, on the other hand, is trying to take in loan signings or free agents, and upstairs there's very, very little understanding taking place between reciprocation because they've got a guy called Stan Harris, I think, behind the scenes at St Johnstone, and he is a very respectable guy within Perth circles, allegedly. But he'll give managers time. At exactly the same time, if St Johnstone get relegated this year, the prerogative will be like Dundee United's. Go up at the first time of asking. The fear for St Johnstone is do they become a Hamilton type of club where they have aspirations to come straight back up, but they don't have the credentials to do it. And that's the worrying factor. And I think this is the start of a long, winding road now.
They are into the second half at Easter Road. It's still Hibernian 0, St Mirren 2, those two early goals from St Mirren. Let's talk about Hearts. Now, again, during the summer there has been a lot of frustration from Hearts fans. The pre-season friendlies haven't gone very well. I don't read too much into them because they're all about fitness. The signings weren't really getting made, but we've made quite a few now. One of them, started yesterday. Frankie Kent I thought was excellent. And for me, the game changed on Alex Lowry coming on. Signed on Thursday. He played on Friday and played on Saturday yesterday. He was excellent. I thought Kiyosuke Tagawa, who came on, was excellent as well. Hearts looking in a better place now. We've got a right back to come in as well. Hopefully, I've heard Ryan Strain might be one of them. The St Mirren player. We've got another Costa Rican striker coming in, Kenneth Vargas. The squad is looking a lot better. I think it is a work in progress, but there has been a lot of talk about the whole Frankie McAvoy, Stephen Naismith thing. They were on Sky a few days ago, and a lot of folk had a lot of comments about that. They looked very uncomfortable. Frankie McAvoy is the head coach. He basically said it himself. It's going to be basically when the decision gets made about the fact who gets the final decision, it will be Frankie McAvoy. As long as the players know who's in charge, that's all that matters. But Dave, I'm going to give you your say on this because I know you've got thoughts about this. Frankie McAvoy and Stephen Naismith. What are your thoughts on this whole situation? And I'll be honest, I've said this already myself. I don't think they should have got appointed anyway. I think there was better options out there. I think we've gone for the cheap option, but I'll back them 100%. What's your thoughts on this whole thing?
Yeah, the whole thing is rather fascinating, isn't it? Because we're going down a certain perception of football, aren't we? We're good. Instead of the old tried and trusted traditional manager and assistant, we're going for head coach and technical director and all that rubbish now, aren't we? And I couldn't believe it. I'll be brutally honest with you. If Frankie McAvoy has the final say on decisions, so be it. And he'll obviously be respected by Hearts fans in that regard. If Stephen Naismith has the final say, then the whole thing just becomes very, very cloudy above gorgy. That's the big thing about it. The whole thing needs a bit of clarifying, I think. Obviously, Frankie McAvoy will have a huge part to play for Hearts the next few Thursdays because obviously Stephen Naismith can't obviously take the team because of his criteria in terms of his UEFA badges. So that's obviously going to be rather fascinating. But I agree with you. I think there would be better choices out there for manager. Um, I think even from a Robbie Nielsen perspective, I think there would be better choices out there in place of Robbie Nielsen. And Hearts fans were clamouring about that. They were clamouring about that. They were clamouring that there's better propositions out there than Robbie. I mean, a club like Hearts could easily attract a Stephen Robinson, for example. And obviously, he's doing Hearts fans the world of good right now with a certain result in the Leaf, but he would do a job no problem in Gorgie. So would a multitude of English league managers. But the English market in terms of management can be a different one because we obviously see that with Heckingbottom didn't work out at Hibs, but obviously now managing the Premier League with Sheffield United. So it swings and roundabouts. But I think McAvoy and Naismith should be judged on this season. If they fail to make European football, albeit they'll obviously be in the bottom six, that for me is deemed failure. And that would show everybody that quite simply it hasn't worked.
I mean, Joe Savage talked weeks ago about the fact that we wanted to bring in quality over quantity because a lot of clubs made a lot of signings. We haven't made as many as a few folk have. And I think he has signed quality. I really like Frankie Kent. I thought he was excellent yesterday. I've mentioned Lowry, who I thought was great. Tagawa, who came off the bench, is really good. But we've got Boyce coming back. We've got Benny coming back. Barry Mackay didn't feature yesterday. I know we're going to sign a right back. Do you think that, obviously you're an Aberdeen fan, I know, but do you think it will be between Hearts and Aberdeen for that third place? Or, as I mentioned to somebody else on Friday, could the European group stage football affect Aberdeen having to play Thursday, Sunday for a long time?
The whole Aberdeen European thing is a very good question, actually, because we've seen how it affected Hearts last season. I'm not so sure on Aberdeen in terms of European European perspective just now. I do think that Aberdeen have still got proof in the pudding to carry out because we see. I thought Hearts were going to kick on this season again, last season, again, and it never quite worked out with that primarily because of European football. And I'd argue had Robbie Nelson had a better balance across the park in terms of managing the players, in terms of managing the club more directly and proactively. Pardon me, I think he'd have still been in post at Gorgie. I'll be very, very honest with you on that front. So I think the whole thing rather fascinating. I find the whole thing entertaining. It's going to be interesting to see how everybody gets on. I think from an Aberdeen perspective, I think it is between Aberdeen and Hearts for third and fourth. I think that'll be the fourth place teams, but at exactly the same time. If Hearts can get the bit between their teeth, if Hearts can maintain a level of balance, they'll have that experience. And that could just be pivotal in the search for third place. For me, third's a good season for Hearts. Third's a great season for Hearts. And that would alleviate probably the whole chat regarding McAvoy and Naismith if we're going to be very, very honest. So I think Aberdeen will be third and fourth, but it's just a case of who, what, where, and why.
Yeah, I mean, one player that I want to mention, he scored 28 goals last season, 24 in the league. Do you think that Lawrence Shankland can better that this season, or is there going to be a slight drop-off? He's got one goal already. It was a tap-in, but he still scored. How do you think Shankland can do this season?
The whole body language thing for me is going to be rather interesting in this regard because we obviously seen how Robbie Nielsen left Dundee United and how Shankland's body language just was never quite there. And I'll be brutally honest with you, he'd have been away from Tannadice far earlier had it not been for the fact it was during COVID times where you couldn't really travel as such, or you had to do 2 week self-isolation periods, whatever have you. I'll be brutally honest by saying that had there not been that restrictions based on the United Kingdom, he probably would have been away far earlier than he was. And under Tam Courts already had a settled way of playing, and that was fine. So there was a mutual agreement for Shamwood to obviously leave. There was a reciprocation. I think that's how both parties would have wanted it. It never quite materialised in Belgium, and luckily Robbie Nelson was obviously in the right place at the right time. The big Shankland back, and what a player he was indeed for Hearts. I do think he's got another good season in him. I think he needs another good season because it's a big season for a lot of Scottish players, especially with the prospect of Euro 2024 and Scotland potentially being there. A big season, score 20 to 25 goals, and he can easily work his place with Steve Clark's squad. So I think he'll do it, and I think he could be a Scotland player by the time the Euros comes around, if we get there indeed, yes.
I certainly hope so. We've got about 35 minutes left on the show. It's been another quick show. Obviously, I'd like to have Dave on with me. We've got 2 more games to go. It's still Hibs 0, St Mirren 2 at the moment, Easter Road, in that first game of the Sunday afternoons. There's a few games next Sunday as well. Let's go to Dens Park. Dundee made their debut in the Premier League. They drew 1-1 with Motherwell. Theo Bair, the ex-St Johnstone player who didn't score a lot of goals for St Johnstone, got the opener, but Lyle Cameron equalised for Dundee. And I've got to say, first game up, I thought Dundee played well yesterday, Dave.
Yeah, in what was horrible conditions, considering how Scotland's sunniest city, let's quite simply had a bit of rain. So Dens Park being Dens Park was under serious threat in August, believe it or not. Would you believe it? I thought it was summer. But, yeah. I think in terms of Motherwell, they obviously had a good start to the game, took the lead for Theo Bair. There's been a lot of question marks to Stuart Kettlewell about Theo Bair because a lot of people wasn't sure about him. I was impressed with Theo Bair. I've watched him a few times for St Johnstone, and I was very impressed with the way he plays. I think he's a very good player. He's not a player that's scoring goals, but he's a player that's very, very good in terms of the hold-up play. Stuart Kettlewell's kind of alluded to it himself about how he does the basic principles of the game very, very well. And that was a huge, huge thing as far as he was concerned. And that's obviously a big thing to have when you've got the basic principles of the game spot on, because it was so proved to be yesterday. The ball came out of the box and Dundee just quite simply couldn't deal with it, and there was Theo Bair to basically tap the ball home. So it was a very good finish as far as he was concerned. I hope it does alleviate some concerns that Motherwell fans might have had about the signing of him, because although he's not Kevin Van Veen standard, who is going to be Kevin Van Veen standard just now in the Scottish Premiership? Because let's be honest, there's not many strikers that are firing in all cylinders. If they are, they're playing for Celtic, Rangers, or perhaps even Aberdeen with perhaps Bojan Miovski or Duke. Shankland, of course. Apart from that, you look at the rest of the league and go, who's scoring you 15, 20 goals? That's going to be the difference between perhaps a top 6 finish and the possible threat of relegation. There's not many strikers at this precise moment in time that's doing exactly that, and I think that's a hugely important thing to raise. Obviously, the whole thing about the game. Motherwell took the lead, as I said. I think Kettlewell was a little bit gutted not to hold on. I think he was disappointed by the manner that Dundee came back into the game. Luke McCowan had a very good game yesterday for Dundee. So did Lyle Cameron. I think midfield, it's a young midfield for Dundee, but I think it's a strong midfield as well. I think it's a midfield that will give teams problems, and that's going to be a huge thing as far as the Dens are concerned. But yeah, Dundee did very, very well to come back at the game. And I think they'll be a different team this year. A lot of people looked at Dundee and went, oh no, they're going to be another yo-yo club again, because obviously promotion, relegation, so forth. But I think Dundee have a better blend of player this year. They've got rid of some old guards such as Paul McGowan and Paul McMullen. I think the latter, he just wanted to move on to a better league in terms of, not a better league, sorry, a better... a league in which he was going to get more opportunities like Ireland, because let's be honest, there was an opportunity of European football as well. financially it was probably a better offer than Dundee, but I'm happy to be proved wrong if that's not the case. But and then Paul McGowan had ran his course at Dundee, let's be honest, and he's at Cove Rangers who are the League One just now, which tells you a certain story within itself. And he was at Dunfermline last year as well. There's obviously doubts with Sean Byron. It looks as though he'll go to a championship club in the not too distant future as well. So there's been a lot of change, and there will continue to be a lot of change. Do I think Dundee will have the same consequences as Rangers potentially might have in terms of the rebuild? I don't think so, because Tony Docherty has moulded the players in the correct possible times. Now, I'll sit here and say I didn't think Tony Docherty was ever going to be a manager, but so it's proved to be. And yeah, he's taken the management life very, very seamlessly, because he's bringing in good players. He's bringing in players that mould and fit the way he wants to play. And it's been a very positive relationship and affinity so far between both parties. Was a draw fair result? Probably, but there's a lot for both sides to learn from as well. And a lot of sides will gain a lot out of yesterday in terms of how they start the season. So I thought it was probably fair.
One player I was really impressed with yesterday, you mentioned him a minute ago actually, Luke McCowan. He made the goal for Leon Cameron, great cross. And no disrespect to Dundee, but do you think Luke McCowan is a better level than Dundee? Could he step up to a better club?
It's a very good question, actually, because I think he could. But if you're going to ask me from the fact of would he walk into Aberdeen's team every week, I don't think he would. I don't think he would. I think he is a good player for Dundee, but at exactly the same time, you look at McCowan and say to yourself, he would suit. It's an interesting one, because I think he would suit a Hibs. I think he would suit a Hearts. As I say, I don't think he would suit an Aberdeen, and I just get that funny feeling about it. I wouldn't be so sure about Hearts either, because if Alan Forrest is at threat of going out the door for an impending move that has been rumoured, then it could get quite interesting regarding McCowan. But McCowan's had a good journey in football. Ayr United was a good grounding point for him, and then he went to Dundee and quite simply set the league alight. Did very, very well in the Premiership, and then Dundee got relegation. And yeah, he set a championship alight, but then had a failed game yesterday. Pardon me. Yeah, I think he's got a big season in him, and then I think after that he'll be targeting a move. I think he needs a big season in terms of wanting that move, and he's also another one that's been there for a relevant amount of time, or a relatively long time, should I say. So he knows the club, and there'll be extra demands put on him this season. So it's up to him to see if he can grab it or not.
72 minutes on the clock at Easter Road. It's now Hibernian 1, St Mirren 2. So Hibs are right back in the game with about 20 minutes left. And we know, as we've seen since yesterday, there has been changes in the law now where injury time is going to be a lot longer now. Substitutions are getting added on along with VAR stuff as well. So there could be a lot long left in that game. So Hibs come back into the game at the moment. But yeah, the conditions were not great at times yesterday. But fair play to both teams putting on a show there. And actually, you've raised a good point there about Theo Bair, because a lot of St Johnstone fans, a lot of other fans are not overly convinced with Theo Bair. I thought he was good yesterday. He showed a lot of pace, a really good finish as well. He probably isn't much of a goal scorer. It was Adam Lafondra that scored the goal for Hibs as well. So Hibs right back in the game. But I mean, what would be a kind of... It's very hard to replace Kevin Van Veen. You mentioned it there. What would be a reasonably decent goal-scoring record for Theo Bair this season for Motherwell?
Good question. 5 to 10 goals. 5 to 10 goals. Like I say, he's not Kevin Van Veen level, but he'll be good as a second-string striker. And I don't mean that in a bad way, just to clarify. I mean that in the way that, just in terms of the way he plays. So probably 5 to 10 goals will do him.
In terms of Dundee, obviously when you just come up, the main kind of aim is to try and stay up. We've talked about the fact that St Johnstone look like they're going to go down. Do you think Dundee are going to be okay this season, or are they going to need to add 3 or 4 more quality players to that squad?
Well, Tony Dock's admitted, I don't need to admit it, Tony Dock's admitted it himself that he's in the hunt for more players. Looks like there'll be a few more loan signings, but Dundee have been spending quite, not heavily, but they've been spending quite productively in the transfer market. Trevor Carson's a good signing. Josh O'Donnell, been there, done it with St Mirren. Forward line, they're looking quite good in the forward line as well. Maybe need one more striker, but I reckon Dundee are 3 players short of being a decent enough efficient side this season, and I think they'll do it. I think Doc's getting a bit of financial backing to go and do that in Dundee. So if they can get the right players in, there might be a bit of a dark horse this season.
What about Motherwell this season? What are you expecting from them? Obviously, they've lost Van Veen, who's a massive, massive blow. Anyone that scores the goal seed is going to be a huge blow. A point at a team that's just been promoted in that kind of conditions, not a bad result. What do you think Motherwell can do this season? And do you still think they need to strengthen in certain areas of that squad?
I think they're too young in midfield. That's maybe what could hurt them. Defensively, I think they're fine. Goalie, I think they're fine. As I say, I think they're too young in midfield. I think they're too young across the squad as well, if I'm going to be very, very honest. I think they need another striker. So I still think there's adjustments for Motherwell to come. I still think they're due 3 or 4 new signings. And Stuart Kettlewell has kind of said that players have to come in before we've signed, and so it's proved to be because players have left and then they've taken loan signings or permanent signings. So I still think there's a bit more business to come from Motherwell yet.
Well, let's get on to the last game, and there's a reason I left it last because it wasn't the best of games, I'm not going to lie. Livingston 0, Aberdeen 0. We'll touch on Aberdeen in a second, but I want to touch on Livingston. Now, I listened to David Martindale the other day, and I love David Martindale, but I did say this on Friday as well. I thought he sounded very defeatist already going into the season. He talked about the fact that he spoke to 6 players and he couldn't financially attract them to Livingston. Now, they got a draw yesterday. It wasn't a lot in the game. I think probably the best chance was Oberlei's chance in the second half. An injury to Bruce Anderson. I hope Bruce Anderson's all right as well. I mean, David Martindale, for me, does sound very negative going into the season. Can you kind of understand where he's coming from? Because it is very hard to attract players to Livingston.
Yeah, I think Livingston have had their hands tied a little bit because I know that all the Premiership clubs have to pay a substantial amount to get VAR in, and I think Martindale's come in and admitted it himself. Had they not had that VAR fee, I think that brings in 6 or 7 players. I might be wrong in terms of how I've just went and said that there, but I think that's what he said. And that's a lot for a club like Livingston. That's a lot. So there's that. I also think that maybe players leaving, such as your Nicky Devlins and all that, the writing's been on the wall for the last few years. The bigger loss for me is Marvin Bartley. I know it happened in February and all that, but him going to Queen of South was a massive loss in terms of how Livingston won the coaching front. Because let's be honest, they were too light defensively last season. Martindale alluded to that yesterday after Drew 0-0 Aberdeen. Let's be honest, it was a very good performance yesterday from Livingston. We'll get onto the game in a minute, but in terms of Livingston, I think that they need reinforcements, but they need the correct level of reinforcements. Daniel Mackay was from Hibs is going to be a really, really good signing. I think he's got a lot to prove in the Premiership, playing against tried and tested and established defenders. So it's going to be interesting to see how he gets on. But yeah, I'm getting the feel that this is the beginning of the end for Livingston. Just the whole picture. Now, it's going to be interesting to see David Martindale's reaction because he's a man by all accounts. He's a man that he'd probably be the type of guy that would look to go and move on. Not in terms of departing with mutual consent, but he'd probably look to go and resign. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that he won't go and resign, but I think if things did take a turn for the worst and he was defeatist and then that was proven on the park, I think Livingston would look to make a change in terms of Martindale looking to... Because Martindale's honest enough in his assessments and all that, and he's got a certain way of working, Martindale, and he's a family man now. we'll also know all his previous. Excuse me. We all know his previous trials and tribulations, but I think also he's a family man now, and the kids have been under so much scrutiny in terms of going to schools and things like that, in terms of the questions they'll get asked, and I bet the family does, in all honesty. But they'll be under much more scrutiny. Livingston was just be bottom for a certain period of time as well. So I find the whole thing really fascinating. But they've got a good 0-0 draw yesterday against Aberdeen. Barry Robson kind of alluded to it in his interview that, let's be honest, Robson had taken his shooting boots with him. But exactly the same time, when you look at everything overboard, you also look at it and say that Miovski and Duke are probably the two best. It's probably one of the best partnerships in the Premiership. I think it's better than what Rangers have. It's probably in par with what Celtic have. And then, let's be honest, in terms of a duo, there's nobody in the Premiership that kind of matches what Aberdeen have. So, Livingston were very, very diligent and very dogged against a good Aberdeen side who like to attack and like to ask questions in the correct areas as well. So, the only disappointment from Livingston was obviously Bruce Anderson going off with the injury that he did. Never good, but especially never good against his former club either, because he's obviously a tried and tested striker. He'd offered to go away to Georgia in the summer, that never quite materialised. And I think for Bruce Anderson, he's obviously had the opportunity to make Livingston his home. He's done that. He's enjoyed a couple of very solid years in West Lothian. And here's hoping he's not out for too long, because him and Joel Newbley are a very good partnership who still have levels to click, I think. Who still have levels to click. And there's been a lot of chat about Joel Newbley as well, which is going to be very interesting because, the whole thing will just. You just hope Livingston don't start deteriorating if players like Joel Newbley and Bruce Anderson maybe get swept away in January. So interesting times in West Lothian at Livingston indeed, yeah.
I mean, there was only 2 shots on target yesterday, and they were both Livingston's. Aberdeen couldn't manage to get a shot on target, but I know it's only one game. It doesn't really matter that much. They did get a point. They play Aberdeen. They play Celtic next week, which will be a really difficult game. But in terms of the business that Aberdeen have done, are you impressed with what they've done? They've signed a lot of players. Rubezic looked a decent addition yesterday. I think bringing Graham Shinnie back and letting Clarkson back a good signing. They've got Or Daddy as well. Are you impressed with what Robson's done in the transfer window so far? And do you think there's still business to be done before the window shuts?
Yeah, I think Clarkson was a good blueprint for Aberdeen to start with, because bringing a player the quality that he has was always going to be hugely important. And then Barry Robson's used his contacts wisely. Aberdeen have got a very, very strong scouting network that obviously allows them to do so much more in comparison to other clubs. But Graham Shinnie was also a good signing defensively, very, very good. Anthony McDowell wasn't there yesterday, of course, and that's a massive miss, but it wasn't too massive because obviously kept the clean sheet. That's hugely positive, but as you say, it was a rubbish game of football. It's never going to be 3-4 at Tony Macaroni, and both managers kind of admitted that after the game, especially Barry Robson. I think there'll be a bit more entertaining. I think there'll be a bit more leeway in terms of chances next Sunday, because Todd allows for that, but both sides, the way they play, allows for that as well, because both sides do play football, both sides do cut teams open, but also there is deficiencies within both back lines as well, and that could be hugely critical for next Sunday. I'm intrigued to see how both sides got on defensively, but that's another conversation for another day. In terms of Aberdeen, I think they're in a good place. For me, I still think we need 3 or 4 signings. Ramadani, as I said earlier to you, I think it's a huge hole filler. I think we need a bit of cover just to help for certain positions as well. Here's a stat figure. Barry Robson's obviously done so well since arriving at Aberdeen. Temporary charge and tremendously well. He's only won 1 game since taking permanent charge. And that's a very surprising stat, I can tell you that.
I didn't actually realise that, to be honest. I think he might be under pressure. As I said, the European games might have an effect. I'm not sure. It is all change at Easter Road. 83 minutes gone. If you're a Hibs fan, You'll be delighted because it is now Hibernian 2, St Mirren 2. So it's all changed at Easter Road. Really interesting the last few minutes coming up here. Hibs obviously in the semis and they're getting that goal back. St Mirren will be hanging on a bit. So St Mirren level now 2-2 Easter Road. A decent game there by the sounds of it. But we've got about 15 minutes left on the show. So let's look at this week. There is European games on this week. Dave kind of touched on it earlier on. There's Champions League qualifier. Rangers play Switzerland side Servette on Wednesday. Hearts play Conference League on Thursday against Rosenborg from Switzerland, and it's Christian Deutsch who's got the goal there for Hibernian. So 2-2 there. And on Thursday as well, Hibernian play Laverne, also Switzerland. Let's start with Rangers. They play Servette on Wednesday. Again, Dave, we've mentioned the fact that Rangers maybe haven't quite gelled as a team yet. Could this be a particularly tricky tie for them?
Yeah, as I said to you earlier, Graham, I think Servette Wednesday's. I know it's obviously over 2 legs, but I think there is a season-defining aspect to it, just in terms of probably the fact that if Rangers crash out of the Champions League early doors, it does put me under massive pressure. Because I did say to people that I felt that Beale needed a big season. Last season was a bit irrelevant in terms of Rangers looking at the challenge because Rangers were still streets behind Celtic in terms of levels behind Celtic, but now the Michael Beale's wanted to do things his own way. He's got rid of some big characters that have done some good stuff for Rangers over the years. Glenn Kamara's one of them, who was a revelation at one point, but now I think Rangers fans just want to see it at the back end of him. We're getting that extent about John Lundstrom as well. I think there's a couple of Rangers fans get a little bit annoyed and frustrated about him as well. Not in terms of how he plays, whatever, but just in terms of performances that he's had in recent times. So there's going to be an interesting one. The team selection for me is going to be rather fascinating. And the game as a whole is going to be rather fascinating as well, because if Rangers lose on Wednesday, then it's going to be a massive week coming up, both in terms of domestic, but also Champions League as well. So, yeah, they've already left the back door open. They can't allow the back door to be open again this week coming. In terms of Hearts, I think they've got an interesting one. It's good just to see how they progress. I think this week is a good barometer for Hearts to see where they're at. If Hearts win the game, then you can look at Hearts and say, okay, excellent side, can be fairly competitive in all fronts and can look to possess a few surprises, 1 or 2 along the way. And then Hibs, they quite simply have to be better than what I know they're coming back and drawing 2 apiece today that we're just to save the hold on, but they'll have to be better than what they have been today in certain stages and also 10 days ago. So the whole thing is very interesting, and what I would say from a Hibs perspective is I think they need to get the goalkeeping situation sorted out sooner rather than later. Borch is a good goalkeeper, as we've all seen, but is he a guy that's going to trust? You're going to trust in terms of these massive games coming up for Hibs? That's the $1 million question for me. But from an Aberdeen point of view as well, I'm looking forward to seeing the Europa League draw tomorrow, because I'm interested to see who we can play against and obviously pick up some games. So yeah, we have an interesting time for Scottish football.
We always talk about the coefficient for Scottish football and the fact that European football is not good enough. How important do you think it is that Rangers, Celtic, Hearts, Aberdeen and Hibs do well in European football this season and raise that coefficient? Because for a long time, it's not been good enough, and I include Hearts in that. We've not been good enough. So how important do you think it is that we progress in Europe and get that coefficient raised?
Well, it's a good job I can't swear this podcast game, because Hibs nearly effed that up 10 days ago. But it is important. You're absolutely right. Celtic and Rangers raised the coefficient bar high last year because they both played in the Champions League. Yes, results maybe don't go well for them, and that's the only black against them. But they did well in terms of being back in Champions League, because although Rangers did well in the European front in terms of reaching the final against Frankfurt, they had a couple of tough assignments and they had a couple of massive results, which was hugely beneficial as far as Rangers were concerned. Celtic, as I said, I think they need a big season in the European front, especially with Brendan Rodgers back involved. And I do think Brendan Rodgers needs a good European campaign, because he hasn't had too much of them For a manager that's so highly rated, and for a manager that's done so well in the game, that's the thing that's holding him back from progressing, probably. Aberdeen, I'm quietly confident that Aberdeen will be in Europe anyway, but yeah, I think Aberdeen need a good campaign. I think there'll be an excitement around Pittodrie just because of how they're obviously doing their guaranteed group stage football. So there's going to be that degree of excitement around Pittodrie. And then Hibs and Hearts, as I said, need big campaigns as well because they were very underwhelming last year. And Hibs have had a few poor campaigns down the European stage, so they need to rectify that fast.
Well, it's all changed at Easter Road again. It is now Hibernian 2, St Mirren 3. Alex Grieve has come off the bench in the 8th, well, whatever it was. The 89th minute, Alex Grieve has just put St Mirren 3-2 up. Some game at Easter Road, Dave. What a game that is.
Do you think that's Lee Johnson under pressure again if he gets beat?
I think it is. I expect him to win on Thursday night against that Andorran team, but that result performance last week, and again, I think Michael mentioned this on Friday, his reaction after they lost last week was bizarre. It was almost like, don't worry, to the Hibs fans, and Hibs fans were raging. I completely agree why they were raging. You cannot lose to an Andorran side. The performance wasn't good enough, and they lost that game. Last season, how many times did we talk about the fact that Johnson was under pressure last season? We talked about El Sakio. They then lost to Hearts twice in the space of a week in the league and the cup. I generally, and I've said this as well, and it's not to be biased, I don't think Lee Johnson will be there at Christmas time. I think he'll be gone by then, if not before that.
Yeah, I've said that to people. A lot of people are saying Steve McQueen for the first manager. I'm not ruling Lee Johnson. I'm not. I'm genuinely not, because Hibs have had a lack of stability over the years, and that's clearly been telling, right? But Sean Maloney got dismissed because, quite simply, he didn't have enough authority to really go and implement his own ideas. He lost too many big games at a crucial time in Hibs this season. That was ultimately why Sean Maloney was let go, in my honest opinion. Because I remember seeing Hibs at Tannadice on Boxing Day. And absolutely wiped the floor with United. That was a very good United side at that time, by the way. And they absolutely wiped the floor. And I went and said to people, I think Sean Maloney will do very, very well Easter Road. It never quite happened that way. But Lee Johnson, in my honest opinion, I said more embarrassments as Hibs manager than Maloney has. Then what? Who else? Who else have Hibs had as managers in the last few years, Graham? Sorry.
They had Paul Heckenbottom. They've had, obviously, Neil Lennon was there. They had, I'm trying to think of the other ones, I can't remember who they were, but they've had a few.
Yeah. The name will come to me, but they've had I know Jack Ross did a reasonable enough job, but Jack Ross was ultimately defined based on cup final defeats and massive game defeats. For me, Lee Johnson's been over. It's hard to be judgmental, but at exactly the same time, I think Lee Johnson creates so much divide amongst Hibs fans, because there's Hibs fans that applaud him in terms of the way he plays, but there's other Hibs fans that look at him and go, Jesus Christ, what the hell have we got on our doorstep? Such as what you see in Andorra last Thursday. Now, Lee Johnson was in the press, obviously Wednesday, looking ahead to the game on Thursday, and there was a lot of chat about how he's been speaking to supporters groups at Hibs and how they've all been speaking to him, and obviously they haven't been too downhearted by what's all happened. But exactly the same time, the whole scenario about everything just is never a good look. And by the way, and where's Jack Ross that I was thinking about? Because let's be honest, Jack Ross did well in terms of reaching European football for Hibs, but the latter stages of this spell at Easter Road were flattering to see. I remember that famous night in Livingston where Hibs were just nowhere to be seen, and that ultimately cost Jack his job, because the timing was very, very poor, especially after beating Rangers in that Wake Up semi-final, if you remember, but at exactly the same time, they haven't recovered from that. For me, I think Jack Ross maybe deserved a bit more time. But his cup form was completely different to his league form. Now, let's be honest, with Jack Ross in the situation that Hibs are in right now, probably not. But we're on another day, we're on another story. And I think Lee Johnson will be under a degree of pressure, not necessarily from the board, more or less from the fan base. And I mean, we've seen it time and time again where a manager has had a poor result, and poor results happen. That's obviously part and parcel of the game. But it was really Hearts when Robbie Nielsen had a poor result. It was Nielsen out, Nielsen out, Nielsen out, Nielsen out. But I get that same feeling about Hibs. One, because of the standard of football in Hibs at times, and secondly, also, I think it's because of some embarrassing results that Hibs have had, and also Lee Johnson's record in Edinburgh derbies isn't exactly appetising either.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and I want to spend these last 5 minutes talking about the SWPL, which I know starts in about a week's time. Glasgow City, as we know, nicked it at the very end of last season. Glasgow City, Rangers and Celtic look strong again this season. I'm really impressed with the business Hearts have done, and Eva Ollett has signed a new 2-year deal as head coach, which I'm delighted about. Dave, are you expecting another competitive SWPL this season?
I think you have to, yeah. But I'd also argue that all the sides have gotten better. For me, I'll start with Aberdeen. I don't have to, but I will. We've taken a full-time manager, and I think that was a hugely positive move as far as Aberdeen were concerned. But I'll focus on the top teams now. Glasgow City took in a good array of players. Leanne Ross was basically, I think Leanne Ross had to go and do that because she had her own selection of players, and it wasn't her team. Now it's her team, and I'm excited to see how Glasgow City get on this season. They've got a proud record within the women's game, and they need to more or less kind of match that now and align that. Rangers is going to be a very interesting one because obviously Joe Potter came in as manager. She's English, but will be completely new to the Scottish game. So the whole thing is going to be very much fascinating. Joe Potter has recruited in England, which has kept the hold of a lot of Scottish-based players, with the exception of Sam Kerr, who deservedly got a move to Bayern Munich. Celtic and Fran Alonso had a rebuild. Fran Alonso's pretty much every period had a rebuild. He's responded in the correct manners, he's brought in the correct formulas, he's brought in the correct players, and Celtic have always been at a very, very good side to go and see. So I'm expecting Celtic to be right in about it. I think Celtic will be a side that will be looking to go that extra yard to go win the league this year. I think Fran Alonso's record against Celtic and Rangers, Glasgow City Rangers has been fairly positive, and know what to keep that going. Hibs will be better this year with Grant Scott. I think Grant Scott will get a good blend out of his Hibs squad. And I think it'll be tied between fourth and fifth between the Hearts and Hibs. And then, yeah, I fancy Montrose have a good season this year. I think Montrose have recruited in the correct areas. They've targeted players that have played the league before. In Hamilton, I think they'll have troubling seasons. Hamilton have gone down the youth development route, and I think they need to be applauded for that. They've kept the hold of Josephine Giard. I think that's a very good piece of business indeed for Hamilton. I think she'll score a fair bit of goals, get sides around about her. And I think that might be the better difference that separates Hamilton and other sides within the league. Yeah, Spartans, Partick Thistle, Motherwell could be rather interesting. I think Motherwell will have a good season on their hands because they've got that bit of maturity now. Motherwell were a very young side, but they've got a bit of maturity now, and that can also stand them a good stead. But I think it's going to be a very good season. I think we're going to have competitive games again. I think the exposure in the television will be very, very good. There was a lot of clamour, of course, about why a certain club like Montrose weren't getting TV access for their game against Celtic next Sunday, but to my understanding, Montrose needs a scaffolding licence in order to go and do that. So once they get that played, they'll be pretty much ready to go. But they're obviously in a good place, and it's going to be a very exciting season. I don't know what I'm doing next Sunday, but I'll pretty much be staying off the alcohol next Saturday game because there's plenty of selection on the football front. So, yep, I can't wait. The Cinch is back, the SWPL's back, football's back. Let's go.
And it has finished Easter Road. It has finished Hibernian 2, St Mirren 3. Great start for St Mirren, poor start for Hibs. We have run out of time. Delighted to be back on a Sunday with my good pal Dave. We are back next Friday at 5 o'clock. I think Michael's back on next week. We're back on again on Sunday as well at 3 o'clock, so always tune in. But thank you to everyone for watching. It's been another great show. Thank you to our producer, Nigel, in the background, who's been doing all the stuff. We shall see you next Friday at 5 o'clock till 7. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
The Locker Room, with all the sports news you need. Live